The final year of the Pacific War scattered lives like leaves in a storm. On islands and coastlines where the fighting had been fiercest, hundreds of women were swept into the tide of surrender. Nurses who had tended the wounded, clerks who had followed the army, auxiliaries pressed into service. They had all been told the same thing. If captured, expect dishonor, expect brutality, expect to vanish. To live as a prisoner was worse than death. Many carried poison hidden in hems, determined never to see captivity. Yet fate betrayed those plans, and when their weapons and vials were stripped away, they faced a reality they had never imagined: captivity in American hands. The journey to the camps was long and filled with silence. The women sat rigid in the trucks, eyes lowered, hearts clenched. Shame filled them more than fear. To be taken alive was already dishonor enough. To be guarded by men whose language they did not know was humiliation deeper still. They remembered every rumor they had been taught: Americans as savages, without discipline, ruled only by appetite. They braced themselves for advances, for cruel laughter, for the slow destruction of their dignity. Yet the days unfolded differently. At the camps, the women were given bunks, food, soap, rules. Strict, yes, but not cruel. Guards spoke through interpreters, warning them of order and boundaries, but did not mock them. Soldiers kept their distance, eyes averted, as if they feared to break something fragile. The women whispered to one another in confusion. "Where is the brutality? Where is the shame?" One nurse recorded secretly, "I waited for the hands of men. Instead, I am ignored. I feel I do not exist." Perhaps this is worse. The weeks settled into routine. Sewing work, cleaning details, roll call at dawn, evenings of silence. But as winter faded and spring approached, something unexpected happened. The guarets began to change, not in discipline, but in expression. The soldiers who walked the perimeter, who stood watch outside the barracks, were young. Their laughter, carried on the wind, was not cruel. Sometimes their eyes lingered longer than before, not with hunger, but with something gentler, harder to name. It began subtly. A guard left an extra ration of bread at the door. Another, when thanked clumsily in broken English, smiled and touched his cap. The women, trained to expect only the worst, felt their hearts pound at these gestures. What did they mean? Was it mockery? Was it pity? Or something unthinkable? Affection? The truth revealed itself slowly. A soldier bent to pick up a scarf one of the women had dropped and returned it not brusquely but tenderly, holding her gaze a moment longer than duty required. Another, when repairing a fence post near the barracks, murmured in halting Japanese, "Home. Do you miss?" The woman who heard it froze, stunned not by the words, but by the softness with which they were spoken. Rumors swept the camp. "They look at us differently now. I saw one watching as though he admired me." Such whispers were dangerous, yet impossible to contain. The women's shame deepened, but so did their confusion. To be treated as objects of lust would have been expected, but to be seen, even briefly, as women deserving of affection, that was a shock no training had prepared them for. One evening, during a work detail on a farm outside the wire, a farmer's wife brought water to the group of Japanese women assigned to gather vegetables. With her came a young soldier, handsome in the sharp angles of youth, his uniform dusty from the road. He held out a bucket. When one of the women reached for it, their hands touched. The moment was brief, accidental. Yet the soldier's face flushed, and his eyes lingered on hers. She turned away quickly, but her heart did not slow for hours. That night she confessed to her diary. "He looked at me not as prisoner, not as enemy, but as woman. I should despise him. Yet I tremble still. The guards were warned often. No contact, no familiarity, no gestures beyond duty. Yet human hearts are not easily ordered. In the silences between commands, in the stolen glances across fences, in the accidental touch of hands passing tools, feelings began to spark, dangerous, forbidden, undeniable. The women, taught to expect chains, instead found themselves bound by something more complicated, the shock of being seen as desirable, even lovable, by the enemy they had been told was a monster. And though none dared name it aloud, the truth grew clearer with each passing night. For some American soldiers, the women they guarded were no longer just prisoners. They were faces that lingered in memory, voices that echoed in dreams, shadows that stirred feelings they could not suppress. Feelings that would soon test every boundary of war, discipline, and loyalty. The spring of 1945 rolled in with winds that smelled of thawing earth and rain on wood. For the Japanese women in captivity, it meant longer work details, warmer nights, and more time outdoors. Yet with the shift in season came something no rulebook could forbid: the growing weight of glances. The American guards remained disciplined, yet their youth betrayed them. A pair of eyes lingered too long, a smile came too quickly, a scarf was handed back with hands that trembled slightly, and every such moment, small as it was, landed like thunder in the prisoners' hearts. They had braced for brutality. Instead, they found themselves disarmed by courtesy. Now, worse than either, they felt the stirrings of something altogether forbidden: tenderness. To admit it was dangerous. To acknowledge it was treason against memory, against loyalty, against the homeland they might never see again. But feelings have little care for flags. They bloom where they will. One evening, after a long day in the fields, a group of women returned to their barracks, weary and silent. The sun bled out behind the fences, painting the sky orange and grey. As they filed past the gate, one soldier, handsome, tall, with a boy's earnestness still clinging to his features, lowered his rifle, removed his cap, and nodded. It was the simplest gesture of respect, yet it cracked something open. That night, whispers raced from bunk to bunk. Did you see him bow his head? Did you see his eyes? The diaries later recovered show how deeply such moments cut. One nurse wrote, "My shame grows heavier. Today he smiled at me, not with mockery, not with cruelty, with warmth. How can I accept this? And yet my chest aches, and I cannot stop the thought. Perhaps I am still a woman, not only a prisoner." The guards wrestled too. Letters home, censored but not erased, carried hints. One private wrote, "They are unlike what we were told. Some are young as my sister. Some smile despite it all. We are ordered to keep distance. I obey. But my heart betrays me when I see their faces." In another, a sergeant confessed, "It is harder to stand guard over them than it was to fight in the jungle. In war, hatred shields a man. Here it withers, and what is left terrifies me." The discipline of the Americans remained strong, but affection slipped through the cracks. Bread rationed for soldiers found its way, mysteriously, onto the women's tables. Flowers appeared in water jars, claimed to have been gathered for decoration, but clearly placed with care. A soldier hummed a tune near the fence, and when a prisoner dared to echo the melody in her own tongue, he turned his face away, hiding a flush. For the women, these moments bred a torment deeper than captivity itself. They had been taught that capture erased honor, that surrender erased worth. And yet here, in the eyes of their captors, they found themselves seen. The shock of it rippled through them like fire. One auxiliary recorded, "He looked at me, and I remembered my reflection in water when I was a girl. I had not seen myself in months, perhaps years. His gaze reminded me I still exist. Is this love, or only my loneliness tricking me?" Another wrote bitterly, "If he truly loved me, he would not stand with a rifle in his hand. But even as I write this, my fingers shake." The camp became a theatre of silence, where gestures meant more than words. A soldier resting his rifle against the wall as he repaired a roof, leaving himself momentarily defenseless in their presence, was noticed by every eye in the barracks. A guard who lowered his voice when addressing them, soft instead of stern, became the subject of whispers for days. When one soldier, fumbling with a phrasebook, attempted to say good morning in Japanese. The women blushed harder than if he had spoken a vow. The Americans feared reprimand. The women feared shame. Yet the current between them could not be denied. It lived in the spaces between orders, in the accidental touches, in the long nights where neither side could sleep, and each listened for the breathing of the other. It was during one such night that the most daring act occurred. Rain battered the roof, and the guards moved their bedrolls closer to the stove. One soldier, younger than most, noticed one of the prisoners shivering. He hesitated, then pulled his own blanket free and tossed it across the room. She froze, staring at it as though it were a live flame. Slowly, she pulled it over her shoulders. She did not look at him. He did not look at her. But both lay awake until dawn, hearts racing with something they could not name. The next morning she returned the blanket folded neatly. Their hands brushed. Neither spoke. The entire barracks buzzed with the tension of it, and though no words had been exchanged, every woman there knew something irreversible had begun. The guards' journals later revealed the risk. "I broke regulation last night," the soldier confessed, "but I could not watch her suffer the cold. If I am punished, so be it. She looked at me not as prisoner, not as enemy, but as human. God forgive me, I will remember that look until I die." Love is a dangerous word in war. But the feelings that grew inside that camp bore its shape. It was not love as in freedom, as in courtship, as in the promise of families and futures. It was love as a flicker in darkness, fragile and fleeting, born of hunger for kindness. Yet it was real. The women felt it most in the moments when they were seen, not touched. When a guard carried water and set it down gently, as if for a guest. When a soldier corrected another who laughed too harshly. When eyes met and held for a heartbeat longer than discipline allowed. These were the moments that pierced their armor, that undid their teachings, that left them trembling. By summer, the war drew to its end. News reached the camp in fragments. Bombs, surrenders, silence from Tokyo. The women knew their homeland was in ruins. They wept privately, imagining the hunger, the devastation. The guards, too, grew restless, sensing the war's close. It was in this atmosphere of endings that the forbidden feelings sharpened, for both sides knew their time together was running out. One evening, as the sky turned violet and the air carried the smell of dust and pine, a soldier paused at the gate longer than usual. His eyes met those of a prisoner who had often caught his gaze before. Neither spoke. Neither moved. But in that silence, something passed between them that neither would forget. She wrote in her diary that night, "He looked at me as if I were not his enemy, not his prisoner, but simply myself. I fear that I will carry this memory longer than I should. I fear it will outlive the war." When the surrender was announced, the camp erupted in noise, cheers from the guards, stunned silence from the prisoners. The war was over. Repatriation would begin soon, and with it came a grief no one dared name. The knowledge that the fragile bonds formed in captivity, in silence and glances, would be torn apart by orders and oceans. Yet the shock remained. For the women, the greatest surprise of captivity was not survival. It was not the food, the shelter, the routines. It was that some of their captors, handsome young soldiers with faces full of life, had looked at them not with cruelty, but with something perilously close to love. The war's end came not with ceremony for the women, but with a hush that felt heavier than gunfire. One morning the guards read new orders. Japan had surrendered. The empire was broken. For the prisoners, the words fell like stones into their chests. Some collapsed in tears. Others clenched their fists until their nails cut skin. Shame burned hotter than grief. To live on after such defeat was unthinkable. Yet here they were, alive, dishonored, waiting for a ship to carry them back to a home they no longer recognized. In the days that followed, the atmosphere of the camp changed. The rifles still gleamed, the fences still stood, but something invisible loosened. Soldiers who once avoided the women's eyes now allowed their gazes to linger. Prisoners who once shrank into silence dared to whisper "thank you" when extra food was set aside. It was as if both sides, knowing their time together was short, began to reveal what had always been hidden beneath discipline. The diaries kept by the women describe this final season with painful clarity. One wrote, "I fear I will never again be seen as I was seen today." He carried a crate past our barracks. He turned and looked at me as though he knew my name, as though he might speak it if he could. I closed my eyes after, but the warmth of that gaze lingers. How can I carry this home? It will destroy me. The guards, too, recorded their turmoil. A sergeant wrote in a letter that never passed censors, "The war is over, but I feel no triumph. These girls, they could be my sister, my neighbor. I have obeyed the rules, but my heart disobeys. When I leave, I will remember their faces, not the battles." The final weeks brought more daring gestures. A soldier pressed a folded flower through the wire, its stem wilted, but its meaning unmistakable. A woman, trembling, tucked it into her sleeve and wept. Another guard left a drawing sketched on scrap paper, a small bird flying free. He slipped it beneath a cup on the table. When the women discovered it, they stared as though it were a relic. One whispered, "He wishes us freedom." The most shocking moment came on a humid night when the guards once again unrolled their blankets in the barracks. The air was thick, sleep elusive. One soldier lay awake, staring at the rafters. Beside him, a prisoner whispered in halting English, "Why?" He turned his head, startled. She swallowed hard and repeated, "Why? No hurt?" His eyes widened, then softened. "Because," he said slowly, "love is stronger." He spoke no more, but the words carved themselves into her soul. She would remember them until her final breath. The next morning, nothing was said. Discipline wrapped the camp once more. But the women carried the weight of that answer. They whispered it among themselves. Love is stronger. It was absurd. It was impossible. Yet it was truer than anything their leaders had ever told them. As repatriation drew near, the camp became a place of strange farewells. Soldiers lingered longer at posts. Women found excuses to step outside, to catch one last glance, one last shared silence. Every smile, every nod, every accidental touch became a memory they knew would have to last a lifetime. When the trucks arrived, the women climbed aboard in silence. Their bundles were small, scraps of clothing, a diary, perhaps a carved trinket smuggled as a keepsake. The guards lined up along the fence. Some saluted, some simply stood with hands clenched at their sides. Eyes met through the wire one last time. No words were spoken, none were needed. One prisoner later wrote, "He looked at me as I stepped onto the truck. Our eyes met. In that gaze was everything, respect, sorrow, affection, and the weight of what could never be. I turned away quickly, but I will see that look every time I close my eyes." On the ships that carried them back across the Pacific, the women kept their silence. To speak of kindness, of affection, of forbidden love discovered in captivity, such words would not survive the censors, nor the judgment waiting in Japan. They returned to families broken by fire, to cities turned to ash, to a homeland that demanded silence. They told of hunger, of labor, of fences. They did not tell of harmonicas in the night, of flowers pressed through wire, of handsome soldiers whose restraint wounded them more than cruelty could have. Yet the truth lived on in the diaries hidden under mattresses, in whispered confessions made decades later to grandchildren. They spoke in old age of a different kind of shock, not of chains or blows, but of being seen, truly seen, by the enemy. They remembered the eyes that lingered, the voices that softened, the moments when love, though forbidden, flickered like a candle in the darkness of war. And the guards, too, carried their memories. In quiet moments back home, long after they had hung up their uniforms, they thought of the women behind the wire. They wondered if they survived, if they married, if they ever remembered the soldier who dared to smile at them. Some never spoke of it. Others confessed in journals found only after death. I never touched her. I never even spoke her name. But she is with me still. The story of those forbidden affections never entered official histories. It was too delicate, too dangerous, too human. Yet it lived, carried quietly across oceans and generations. For the women, the greatest shock of captivity was not survival. It was not shame. It was not even the war's end. It was this, that among the enemies they had been taught to fear, there were men who looked at them with something dangerously close to love. And though they returned home, though they buried it in silence, that truth never left them. It lived in their hearts, in their memories, in the secret belief that even in the darkest of times, love had found a way to exist, if only for a moment, behind barbed wire.